Hit me if you want to live.
This scene puts me on the absolute edge of my seat. And that's kind of an ironic thing for me to say given what's actually happening on screen. So, what is happening? Well, to the unfamiliar, this is a scene from the 1991 film Terminator 2 Judgment Day, directed by James Cameron, and shows Sarah Connor on the run from the T-800 in the asylum that she's been kept in. And if you've seen the previous film, then you know exactly the feeling that this scene gives off, and understand where I'm coming from. But what is it that makes this scene so special? Well, that's basically the focus of this video. You see, this scene could be described as an example of ironic performative tension. Now I know that term does sound like a handful, and yeah, it is. That's because it's not an official term used by screenwriters to describe a given scene and was completely made up by me. But given the meaning of each word in the term, I think it's justifiable to use these terms to describe any given scene that I will be looking at in this video. And the two main films I will be focusing on are Terminator 2 Judgment Day and Spider-Man Homecoming. But I'll also be looking at smaller examples like Toy Story 4, Coco, and even the Spider-Man game from the PS4. So, big spoilers ahead. What does the term ironic performative tension mean? Well, in essence, when a scene generates ironic performative tension, it means that the established tone and atmosphere of a scene contradicts the actual context behind the actions of the characters on screen. In other words, what the characters are doing on screen should be completely against what's being implied. In order to fully understand this term, we have to break down the meaning of each word and apply it to a fairly simple example. If we look at the term, the word ironic means paradoxical or contradictory. Performative means actional or practical, and tension is another word for suspense or mental or even emotional strain. And coincidentally, these three words could also be presented by the three components used to create this scenario. The scenario of ironic performative tension consists of three components: a stage, which is where the events occur, the opposing parties that undergo this act that spawns tension, and the dampener, which inhibits them from acting upon this tension. Let's look at an example from a film with a surprisingly similar scene: the final performance from Pixar's Coco. So in this scene we have the stage, obviously, the two performers being Ernesto de la Cruz and Mama Imelda, and the audience as the dampener. The context behind this scene is that Imelda and de la Cruz are fighting over a photo of Hector that will save him from his final death. And in this scene, the tension spawns from their actions to acquire it. However, this scene takes place during a performance, so they have to move accordingly and sing accordingly to the music in order to not raise suspicion from the audience, and thus making it harder for them to act upon this photo. This is where the irony of their situation lies, in their fixed movements observed by the audience. They are dancing when they should be fighting, thus being ironic performative tension. This is only one example. There are other examples in other films like Toy Story 4, where Woody and Bo Peep meet for the first time, and even in the Spider-Man game where Peter and Martin Lee are meeting for the last time face to face before he is stopped by Peter in Grand Central Station. In Toy Story 4, the scene at play is between Woody and Bo Peep meeting at the playground again. The context of this scene is that both Woody and Bo Peep haven't seen each other years ago after she was sold off to the next owner. So when they finally meet again at the park, the expectation is that they would hug and comfort each other. But the fact that they're being observed by a child means that both of them can't act upon each other, thus being ironic to their situation, because they have to stay stiff. The child on play acts as the dampener. In the Spider-Man game, Peter knows that Martin Lee is dangerous, and it's the audience's assumption that he knows Peter is trying to stop him. So there is suspense to them fighting, but the only reason they don't fight is because Aunt May is with them, thus preventing both Peter and Martin from acting. So in this case, Aunt May is the one who's playing as the dampener, establishing the ironic situation that both Peter and Martin find themselves in. All of these scenes play toward the idea of ironic performative tension in the simplest form because the dampener inhibits them from acting towards their given situation, and thus they have to play by the rules of the contradictory tone of the scene. And now, with that said, let's get back to the Terminator. So what is happening and what is being implied? Well, we should first establish the context of this scene. So in the previous film, Sarah Connor was being hunted by the T-800, and that entire film feeds off the idea of Sarah fearing this Terminator and avoiding it as much as possible. which leads to a very compelling cat and mouse game. This is where the main form of tension lies, her fear of the Terminator. But then when we get to later in the second film, when she finds out that the Terminator has returned, she tries to escape the asylum, but on her way out, she encounters the Terminator that she so fears. So off the back, there is tension generated by her reaction and fear of the Terminator. But what's actually happening in this scene is that the Terminator isn't there to kill her, but to rescue her. So with that added perspective, there's no reason for Sarah to fear, but yet she does. So Sarah is acting fearful towards something she doesn't have to, which is where the irony lies. But what's interesting about this scene is the role of the dampener being John. I previously said that the role of the dampener is to tame the actions of the opposing parties undergoing tension. But in this case, John isn't there to keep Sarah and the Terminator from fighting, but to calm her down. This scenario is much more interesting because it creates a twist on the traditional form of this term and ultimately adds a lot more suspense even without there having to be any. So I hope with that said, I have deeply explained the nature of this scene and what makes it so special. But there is another scene that I like to have a closer look at and see how it operates in a simpler way. The car scene from Spider-Man Homecoming. This scene is similar to one in the PS4 game, however what's unique about this one is that it has a developing situation to the opposing parties. In this scene, Peter Parker is in the same car as his enemy and he knows that Adrian is the Vulture. However, when the scene starts, the Vulture doesn't know that Peter is Spider-Man. So the tension of this scene lies in the contrast between the knowledge that Peter and the Vulture have of each other. There's a great video by Lessons from the Screenplay that takes a look at how Vulture figures out Peter's identity and then leveling the field of context. So both Peter and Adrian are at opposition with each other in an incredibly confined space. And the dampener in this scene is Liz, the girl Peter's into and the daughter of his enemy. So neither Peter and Adrian can act upon each other because they don't want to involve Liz in their conflict. And it's at the climax of this scene that Adrian finally figures out Peter's identity and then resolves the tension as soon as Liz leaves the car. The scenario is more simplistic than Terminator 2, but it is interesting in how it adds a changing arc to one of its opposing parties, and then resolving the tension once the dampener is absent. So to summarize, I think what makes this form of tension so unique is because the audience is constantly on edge due to their anticipation of action, but is constantly kept at bay, and thus prolonging the buildup of suspense and thus resulting in ironic performative tension. Thanks for watching. In my next video, I will be taking a look at the classic cartoon TV show Tom and Jerry to see how one of the best episodes of the show mastered 3 forms of comedy and the brilliant implications behind each form. Thanks for watching.